I literally can't keep up anymore, and I'm so far behind. Thank God our middle son is a huge country fan, and if it wasn't for him...
The rise and fall of old country music stars who once tripled their net worth with shows, catalogs, and endorsements shows that the future does not guarantee anyone. These stars were the best of yesteryears. Upcoming country musicians looked up to them for direction and guidance. However, how they fell like a pack of cards, dying broke and penniless, still sends a shock down the spine of country music lovers. Stay tuned, and let's uncover 15 country music stars who died in poverty even though they once swarmed in abundant riches. Number 15, Faren Young.
Oh, boy.
We've been around that long.
Yes, well...
The heartbreaking story surrounding his plunge from riches to misery still teaches everyone that success cannot be predicted easily. Faren, from the 1950s to the mid-1980s, was a sensation you couldn't write off, even if you had done so to his contemporaries. Known as the hillbilly heartthrob, he knew how to bring solace to a drowning world with his music. After signing with Capitol Records in 1952, Young moved to Nashville, where he recorded his first chart hit, Going Steady. Soon, he began to cash out, and by the late 1960s, he had invested in real estate and several other ventures, including Music City News, and extending a hand of leverage to newcomers. So, how did this once celebrated star fade away like he never existed? Shortly after country music evolved into something spectacular, Young sold his catalog for a fee short of nothing. When radio gurus described his sound as yesterday, he soon became a shadow of himself in isolation. Several bills began to pile up, and when he couldn't pay them any longer, depression became his dwelling place. This forced him to end his life on a sad note of suicide in December 1996. How do we explain that one of the fathers of country music ended sadly because the effects of poverty stripped him of his dignity? Number 14, Lefty Friselle.
Lefty? Hello. Well, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. It's good to have you here with us, man.
On a more serious note, the nuzzling and buzzing of country music of yesteryears would not have been identified without the likes of Lefty Friselle on the wheels of steel. Lefty left a mark with his music. Generations will eventually speak of his legacy. Right from the 1950s, Friselle began to make waves with his debut two-sided singles, If You've Got the Money, I've Got the Time, I Love You a Thousand Ways. And by 1959, he was no longer a fling, but a household name. Music began to pay off eventually for Friselle, and by 25, he had everything at his disposal, reaffirming repeatedly that he was the man for the moment while buying expensive Cadillacs. By 1953, because of poor contracts, mismanagement, and a growing alcohol addiction, Friselle found his career floundering, and before he could say jack, he was left with little or nothing to boost his career. He even sold his publishing to settle tax liens as his royalties dwindled, but all was in vain, as it could not resurrect his dying career. Soon, he sold his diamond guitar and moved into a rented apartment, but still, he didn't get the life he once lived. Thinking too much about how life had reduced him to nothing, he died of liver failure at age 47 on July 1975. His funeral was paid for by friends whose lives he touched with his music, and while laying him to rest, they couldn't help but echo some of his hits. Number 13, Johnny Paycheck.
That was a real raw that I hit.
Every time fervent country lovers play the inspiring songs of Johnny, they have never ceased to speak of the excellence he brought with some of his evergreen songs. What then made him fall from wealth to lack and penury? During his days, Johnny was notable for recording David Allan Coe's song, Take This Job and Shove It. His greatest success came in 1970 when he popularized the country music outlaw movement, which included some of his contemporaries like Hank Williams Jr., Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Merle Haggard. Though his music was just as phenomenal as his voice, his career plummeted to death because of several issues he couldn't handle. He mismanaged his royalties, blasting them on cocaine, pills, and attorneys, until he was sent to prison in the early 1990s. Life never remained the same for him, and even though the prison world celebrated his influence, he suffered greatly for his mistake. Upon returning from prison, the IRS confiscated his house, tour bus, and even the Grammys. In a bid to solve his penniless problem, he went around begging for alms at gas stations, with his failing health deteriorating every second that passed. After contracting asthma and emphysema, he gave up the ghost at Nashville Vanderbilt University Medical Center in 2003 at age 64. Number 12, Hank Lachan.
See you again.
Thank you.
I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks.
I know. It's good to have you on backstage tonight,
Listen,
too.
you remember the first time I met you?
How Hank Lachan fell off the cliff of greatness, so much so that he became a riddle to naysayers, can be very terrifying if you view it from the lens of reality. He was an American country music singer and songwriter with 70 chart singles, including 2 #1 hits on the Billboard Country chart. His biggest hits included Send Me the Pillow You Dream On and his signature Please Help Me, I'm Falling. Ironically, he fell so far with so many casualties. After joining the cast of the Grand Ole Opry, he became a major concert attraction internationally, touring overseas and making a name for himself with much royalty. However, he received little or no royalties for his efforts. Eventually, things became sour when the British rock invasion stormed the American airwaves. His bookings reduced drastically, leaving him alone to sort things out. Unfortunately, all his efforts yielded no positive results, and even with his album in the 70s, he was left with no option but to pay a loan he had never signed. Knowing fully well that he had nothing left to lose, he moved to Bruton and spent most of his life there until he died at age 91 on March 2009. Number 11. David Stringbean Aikman.
Every time I do this song here, I have a fit, and I feel one coming on right now.
Life can be brutal sometimes, and honestly, David Stringbean had a bad experience with it before he passed on to glory. His rags to riches story shows that glitz and glamour wouldn't help you when things take a twist eventually. He wasn't just a singer and songwriter, but came as a total package, plying the road of comedy and baseball. David was well known for his old banjo-picking style, careful comedy, music mix, and memorable stage wardrobe. From 1943 to 1945, Aikman played banjo for Monroe's band, performing on recordings such as Goodbye Old Pal. He also teamed with Willie Egbert Westbrook as Stringbeans and Cousin Wilbur, a comedy duo that appeared on the same bill as Monroe's band. Even though he made a lot of money, his childhood memories made him stash lots of cash behind bricks in his chimney and beneath the floorboards of his rustic cabin outside of Nashville. He lived like he had nothing, while thousands of dollars were stacked in unusual places. Sadly, in November 1973, while he was returning from the Opry, 2 robbers ambushed him and his wife, leaving them in a pool of blood to their fate. They died on the porch a few minutes later, and years later, new owners of the cabin emerged, with thousands of moldy bundles totaling over 20,000 allegedly found in the apartment. Despite pulling a great stunt on television with his talent, he died like a puppet who had nothing, only because he was trying to guard money he didn't spend. Number 10. Bla1 Foley.
Pawn shop to get the guitar, and the pawn shop guy says,
How the Mighty Have Fallen is the case of Bla1 Foley, who was once the underdog of country music. Foley was a musical genius who knew how to enshrine his poetic lyrics into his music when the need arose. He grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and performed in several gigs with a gospel band called the Singing Fuller Family, which consisted of his mother, brother, and sisters. Foley's attraction to duct tape, with which he fashioned or ornamented various items, clothes, boots, and wallets, earned him yet another appellation, Duct Tape Messiah. His song, If I Could Fly, made him a celebrated figure among his elites, and with a short decade of career, he flew away without return. In 1989, while defending a friend, he caught a bullet in his chest and didn't recover until he passed on. Paramedics only found $30 in his archives and a check he never cashed. Even though his posthumous album did very well, it still couldn't pay for the excesses he accrued while living. Number 9. Townes Van Zandt.
And I was running out of tape, just couldn't work the cassette at all, and I showed him, I said, well, I'll tell you what.
It is disheartening to see one famous country music star become a shadow of himself after living in affluence at the earliest stage of his career. He wrote numerous songs, such as Poncho and Lefty, for the sake of the song, If I Needed You, Snake Mountain Blues, Waiting Around to Die, and after several decades of his career, he died, but not honorably. Much of his life was spent touring various bars, music clubs, colleges, and folk venues and festivals, often lodging in motel rooms or friends' homes. Diagnosed with a rare case of bipolar disorder, he went through therapy that did little or no good for his memory. Things got worse, as he often signed off a royalty check and handed it to a stranger while hopping on a bus to the next available gig. Concerned family and friends did what they could to bring him back, but all efforts fell on deaf ears. All his money and royalties flew away fast, at the pace of light traveling, because a large part of his memory had been erased through therapy. Even though he was a chronic drunkard, the deadly effects were not visible until January 1st, 1997, when he died of cardiac arrhythmia at the age of 52. Number 8. Jim Reeves.
Well, it is right to tell the truth about it.
If you like, by the music. It's purely and simple.
Even the best among the best can sometimes face the same fate as an ordinary country music star. Jim Reeves went through the worst career stage when his finances dwindled rapidly. Reeves was one of the earliest pioneers and practitioners of the Nashville sound. He was a driving force in developing country music in the 1960s. Known as Gentleman Jim, he had a unique sound that spanned decades of his career. Not to forget, he was responsible for the timely hits Mexican Joe, Adios Amigo, Welcome to My World, and Am I Losing You? He was the man for the moment, as he had his plane and invested in cattle. However, the sky he loved most played a visible role in his demise in 1964 when his Beechcraft Debonair aircraft crash landed in Nashville. After his fraudulent partners took everything he had struggled for over the years to acquire, he left his widowed wife with nothing to show for all his efforts. After several legal battles, she became frustrated and mortgaged their house to fund lawsuits. Even though victory came later for her in the 90s, medical bills and loans had swallowed everything before it arrived. Jim's life was a perfect example of a man working yet not reaping a dime from his investment, while others who knew nothing about his struggles made a living off him. Number 7. Gram Parsons. While the late Gram Parsons was a big name in the country industry of yesteryears, a few years later, he couldn't even boast of the littlest of things because life had thrown pebbles he couldn't handle. He popularized cosmic American music, a country, rhythm and blues, folk, and rock hybrid. During his lifetime, he was credited with helping to found the country, rock, and alt-country genres and received a ranking of number 87 on Rolling Stone's 100 Greatest Artists of All Time. By age 16, he had graduated to folk music, and in 1963, he teamed up with his first professional outfit, the Shilohs. Gram inherited a fortune at 21 and blew it in a flash, not minding the consequences. Shortly after the Flying Burrito Brothers imploded, he was left to his fate, this time scrounging for change, so he could at least have breakfast. In 1973, his longtime wish came to pass during a trip to Joshua Tree. After falling victim to an overdose, he passed away, and his friends cremated his body, as this was his wish when he was alive. Even though Gram inherited a lot of fortune, he still couldn't pay for the bills that piled up, and even his estate couldn't cover all the accrued expenses. Number 6. Larry John Wilson. The story of how Larry John Wilson became a perfect example of penury, even after years of investment, shows that nothing is guaranteed, not even the life we live. Born in Swainsboro, Georgia, he began playing guitar at a very tender age, and by 1975, he had released his album, New Beginnings. 3 more albums on the Monument record label, imprint of CBS Records, followed. Let Me Sing My Song to You, 1976, Loose Change, 1977, and The Sojourner, 1979. After facing several setbacks, he left the music scene but returned in the late 1980s when other songwriters encouraged him to keep the gear rolling. He began touring again in 1989, and by 2003, he had exceeded expectations. Wilson also appeared in the documentary film Heart-Worn Highways, recorded in 1975 to 1976, where he was filmed recording the song O Hoopee River Bottomland. Wilson was always a sensation, and that fetched him a lot of fortune, even while doing what he knew how to do best. How then was he reduced to a level of bitter experiences? John's ordeal began when radio houses and show promoters identified his sound as not eligible for the mainstream, and in the blink of an eye, everything he worked for vanished into thin air. He could no longer feed his family from his royalties, so he did something to salvage the situation. He became a truck driver, a tire salesman, and a guitar teacher in small towns where no one knew he was once the most dignified artist, as certified by Rolling Stone. In 2010, after a brief impact on an indie soundtrack, he checked into the hospital with chest pain he could no longer ignore. Sadly, he passed away from a stroke in June 2010 at the age of 69, with more bills at his death than when he was living. Wilson's life proves that even your acquisitions are not secure when there are twists and turns. Number 5. Hank Snow.
In country music about 30 years ago, there was one man whose records I always bought, perhaps my biggest influence, and I'm delighted that he's here with me.
Hank Snow's life is a pure definition of ups and downs, and even with the fortune accrued over the years, it still couldn't save him from the disaster that hit him. Hank was a Canadian country music guitarist, singer, and songwriter. Between 1950 and 1980, he recorded over 140 albums and charted more than 85 singles on the Billboard country charts. Snow's delivery was always spectacular, and his songs were not just about one figure alone, but they cut across joy, freedom, travel, anguish, and love. His works were influenced by what he went through in childhood, and instead of reacting negatively, he channeled that passion into making waves. He knew how to blend his soothing voice to calm the nerves of his listeners, and from his archives came songs like I'm Moving On, The Golden Rocket, The Rumba Boogie, I Don't Hurt Anymore, Let Me Go, Lover, I've Been Everywhere, and Hello Love. He maintained a formidable spot in country music until things began to dwindle quickly. He got into a mess when he hired managers who sabotaged his efforts, yet portrayed themselves as doing much for him. They mismanaged his funds and left him with little or nothing, including highly rated Elvis Presley. Hoping to make do with what was left, he invested the remaining income into ranches. Unfortunately, it yielded more sorrow, as his highly anticipated income was dashed to pieces when it flooded. Things further aggravated when he discovered that his son had mismanaged funds designated for tours and busy schedules. Things never changed for Hank. Even if he recovered a percentage of what he had invested over the years, it was too small to salvage the frustration he had been plunged into. On December 20th, 1999, he died at his Rainbow Ranch in Madison, Tennessee. After his death, it was discovered that the debt he had accrued was equivalent to the tour bus he bought years earlier. Fame does not guarantee any man. This minute, you might be cruising in the best of moments, and the next minute, you're faced with the saddening reality of life. Number 4, Tommy Collins.
Which will be an icon for the people who worked over 100 odd.
Tommy Collins' ordeal shows how life can be that even after losing it all, no one wants to associate with you, not even those you once helped. Leonard Raymond Sipes, better known as Tommy Collins, was an American country singer and songwriter. Active primarily during the 1950s through the 1970s, he was instrumental in helping create the Bakersfield sound in the country music genre. Collins was a man of few words, yet his melodies could quickly sweep you off your feet when he opened his mouth. He was solely responsible for some of the timely hits that filled the airwaves during the mid-1950s. Songs like It Tickles and What You Gonna Do Now were some hits he introduced to the country music community and the world industry. He was also a good writer whose writings were featured in songs that broke the internet. Songs like If You Ain't Lovin', You Ain't Livin', Carolyn, and The Roots of My Raising gave him a respectable platform, even while dealing with his contemporaries. Collins was the inspiration and character talked about in Craig Morgan's song, I Wish I Could See Bakersfield. On the downside, Tommy battled depression, and at one point, he parked his Cadillac on Highway 19 and wandered into a field, vanishing from the sight of anyone for several days. Music executives didn't have to worry much. They shrugged it off and moved on. By the time he resurfaced, his bank account had been stripped by many IRS demands, leaving him with nothing tangible to hold on to. Tommy left music for a while and stepped onto the spiritual shores of ministry, attending a Bible college. There, he began to sell Bibles door to door just to make ends meet, while radio stations slammed his compositions sung by others who cashed the checks. All hopes to resuscitate his career by show promoters failed woefully, as he could no longer perform due to dementia that had taken a large part of him. On March 14th, 2000, he died with not a penny attached to his name, even though his compositions were doing well. What a sad way to end a career that had once amassed a fortune for himself and his record label. Number 3, Johnny Horton.
Friends, this gentleman, of course, is Johnny Horton.
Even the most celebrated country artists can fall into a ditch when the waves of life come hitting them as hard as if they never existed. On the flip side, Johnny Horton went through the most devastating shock, and just as it didn't come with prior notice, it hit him hard. Johnny Horton was an American country, honky-tonk, and rockabilly musician who pulled great stunts during the 1950s. He is best known for the mind-blowing results that came from a series of inspired narrative country saga songs that became international hits. He was always at his best composure and was awarded the 1960 Grammy Award for Best Country and Western Recording. He came prepared into the country music scene. By 2001, one of his songs had been ranked number 333 of the Recording Industry Association of America's Songs of the Century. Among several of his contemporaries, he was preferred because he was always calm and knew how to sell himself at the slightest opportunity that came his way. Though things fared sumptuously well, he didn't capitalize on what he had and suffered greatly. In 1960, a drunk driver crashed head-on into his Cadillac. This was the beginning of a never-ending spiral that eventually caused his death. Horton died en route to the hospital, and Tomlinson, his band member, was seriously injured. His leg was later amputated. Though many assumed he would salvage the situation immediately, contrary to their thoughts, he faced debts he couldn't pay off due to bad paperwork and wrong timing. Horton's manager at the time had not updated his life insurance, and all publishing rights were tied to future recordings. His widow, Billie Jean, was left with nothing to hold on to, as lawyers and recurring tax pressures stripped her of what was left. It even reached the point that she had to do menial jobs to pay for her daughter's school fees. Yet her husband's songs were the rave of the moment on radio stations and several media platforms. If this isn't scary, what could be scarier? Number 2, Billie Joe Spears.
As I say, it's always nice to have you singing here at the house. You feel like you're back home now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You spent, 6 weeks recently in England?
How everything can fly so soon when a devastating situation hits a person is a phenomenon many are yet to understand. Billie Joe was a good woman who enjoyed success to the highest level. Still, when the unexpected hit her, she struggled to stand again, but eventually lost control after several tries. Born Billie Jean Moore, she was an American country singer known for a series of singles whose characters often represented women in assertive positions. She never resembled success, but was success in pure definition. Among the recordings that blew the world's speakers was a song about sexual harassment, Mr. Walker, along with It's All Over and Blanket on the Ground. Spears was raised in a working-class family and began her first recording on the Abbott label at age 13. From that time, the world knew her as a respectable figure, and she spanned through the decade of her career. She was the mastermind behind songs like I've Got What It Takes, Misty Blue, If You Want Me, 57 Chevrolet, and a cover of I Will Survive. By the 1990s, she was no longer in vogue, but played at social clubs for modest fees that could barely cover her fares and breakfast. To make matters worse, she went through throat surgery, and by the time she realized what was happening, her American record label had folded and her royalties plunged into the mud. She had no choice but to move to a modest house while selling things to make ends meet. All glimmers of hope were lost again when promoters decided to extend a hand of gratitude by bringing her back to the stage, but before anything could be done, the exchange rate and visa fees swallowed what she would have earned. Life was no longer what it used to be, and instead of complaining, she accepted her fate and kept living a meager life. At 73, she died of cancer on December 14, 2011, at her home in Vidalia, with more gold records to her name, but no commensurate revenue in her bank accounts. This goes a long way to show that life can be cruel in times you least expect. Number 1, Mel Street. How heartbreaking it is to see the once revered Mel Street plummet into a financial brouhaha he never escaped from until he passed. Street was an American country music singer with 13 top 20 hits on the Billboard country charts. Street was born near Grundy, Virginia, and in that area, he grew up to become the best man in country music. He began performing on Western Virginia and West Virginia radio shows at 16. From 1968 to 1972, Street hosted a show on a Bluefield, West Virginia television station, and from that standpoint, his influence spread worldwide. While everyone was still locked in his former songs, he went on to release several hits in the mid-70s, like You Make Me Feel More Like a Man, Forbidden Angel, I Met a Friend of Yours Today, If I Had a Cheatin' Heart, and Smoky Mountain Memories. Everyone thought he would keep this pace, but contrary to people's opinions, he became something that no one could ever imagine he would be. He battled depression after his record label folded, and several expenses poured over him like water until they eventually consumed him. No one knew he was going through all of this until 1978 when he took his own life. Hours before a scheduled performance, he had dressed in his fine attire and kissed his family goodbye, only to take his own life a few minutes after leaving their sight. Shortly after his demise, friends found statements concerning royalties that he never got to enjoy. Funeral costs skyrocketed, and when they checked his bank, there was nothing left to host a befitting funeral. Friends and family staged a benefit concert just to gather enough to lay him to rest perfectly. This happened while radio stations slammed his songs, but never knew the once celebrated man ended in a tragic way that shouldn't have happened. His posthumous album, Mel Street's Greatest Hits, was promoted via television advertisements in 1981 and sold 400,000 copies. What else can we say about this rundown of 15 country music stars? The truth remains that life is not guaranteed, and situations can plummet a person's circumstances, leaving those who had it all as if they had never possessed anything before. This is also a reminder that while you live your best life, ensure you never go broke because it is cold and hazy, and no one would cover your laxity. Which of these country music stars do you think was the architect of their downfall? Please let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Before you go, click on the video displayed on your screen.